Ryan.
Today, we are learning basketball with Eric Weiss, the Director of Learning at Luceo Sports, former draft and development consultant at Sports Aptitude, and former head of NBA scouting at Draft Express, and now the co-creator of Crowdscout with William Huang, a new helpful tool for finding, sharing, and breaking down NBA film clips. I know I've used it to break down games right after they happen. You can sort by players, you can sort by games, you can sort by different little play types, and find all the clips all in one place. It's super helpful for breaking down the film. But before we jump into that, how you doing today, Eric?
I'm doing pretty well. How you doing?
Excited to talk. I've been enjoying the Crowdscout app ever since we've got the ball rolling and being able to play around with the tools there. What kind of led to that idea? Like, where did that come from?
So just a little bit of background. You kind of hit the beats, but predominantly I started consulting in the NBA, not exclusively in the NBA, but predominantly in the NBA as a draft scout, and I did that for 20 years. Worked with almost every single team. Was doing 1/3 to 1/2 of the league for a good solid 10 years. So like a lot of conversations, a lot of being able to cross-reference things, a lot of being able to see behind the veil and how process works. And one of the things that really stood out to me was how siloed evaluation gets, because you have decentralized work groups that are trying to cover, but the ability to actually see what the scout is reporting on, right? See what the analysis is related to, is something that didn't exist, doesn't still for a lot of teams, but like it's very antithetical to kind of the typical modern article process, right? Where you're writing analysis and putting clips in, or even on social media where you add a visual and then talk about it. Like a lot of scouting databases are just experts giving opinions on stuff that they saw that no one else can cross-validate, right? So it's something that bothered me for a long time. And then another part of it was I just don't have the time to write like deep like quality long form stuff. But I watch a ton of basketball and I like writing. It's just a much different production process. So in a lot of ways, Crowdscout was my way of basically satisfying my desire to, I spent a lot of time. Twitter was always the one social media thing I used, because I just call it text messaging in public, basically. But it's a great, easy, quick way to share thoughts and have comments. But my stuff I like the most is things that are attached to like quality analysis, right? And the simplest one is video plus notes. So this is kind of what the culmination was. I wanted to create something that was more driven, so it was kind of basketball specific, so you could start to build topic specific material, have a place where you could look up things, that were basketball relevant, and then have that kind of essence of, video plus quick form evaluation. And then the part that we're evolving now is the kind of tagging and filtration to get to more nuanced, basketball specific stuff that has to do with, playbook, skill sets, things of that nature. But that was essentially it. Just wanted a forum where everyone could kind of go and basically very quickly get insight with observation, and then participate in a dialogue, around that.
And like you just kind of described, it's really helpful for just sharing a quick thought. Like you find one clip or a playlist of clips, as it's called on the site. Maybe you find the 10 pick and rolls that Jalen Suggs ran at the end of the game the other night, and you have some quick thoughts on all these, but you don't want to download all the clips, share them on your phone, store them on your phone, and try to send 10 individual clips to someone. You can just send a link. It has all the clips in one, and you can add your notes right there, all your thoughts, and even break it down to a granular level of a play-by-play, hitting on each thought or anything that stands out for each one. So just a super convenient way to break down film and share film. And, I know with Swish Theory, obviously, we have been kind of checking in on some players using this site. using playback where we're recording now and on the Swish Theory playback channel every Wednesday. Check it out, where we hop on and kind of catch up and check in on some guys for something called a Finding a Role series, where started by Charlie Cummings. We've expanded it with the site where we all pick a few guys that we want to see that might we're looking for the next Derek White in a way, the guys that pop out in their role that might not be considered a star at other levels, but then suddenly find that perfect role where they jump out. Maybe they're making an all defensive team. Maybe they're in the contention for a most improved type of award, something like that, where like my guys are Jalen Suggs, Anthony Black, Jaden Ivey, Amen Thompson, and Chet Holmgren. And have been really excited about some of their progress this season. So we're trying to kind of see where they're at before the season, what we project they could do the rest of the season, and just try to find some guys that we think could pop if given that right mix of role, opportunity, situation, and balance and investment from the team. So, super exciting to be able to break those games down with you and Charlie and Lucas and everybody on the Swish team. So did you have kind of any thoughts on that Finding Role series?
Yeah, like obviously this is for the audience, and we could talk about this all the time. But one of the other things that has always been really fascinating with me is I'm a Draft Express. Like one of the OG internet draft people, right? Even though I went private and disappeared for like 15 years, that was kind of our shtick, right? With the mock draft, the first mock draft online and all that. But I love evaluating, development, and that's essentially what scouting is. Like if you're doing it right, it's a longitudinal process. It's not the year before a guy gets drafted process. It's a multi process of evaluating them in their high school, like as many environments as possible, right? It's supposed to be a check-in over, at least 2 to 4 years, depending on what you're doing. And that process and seeing guys develop is fascinating. But what's always been interesting to me is that once guys kind of get driven off the lot in the draft, everyone, like, the draft cycle goes to the next crop of guys. But then draft enthusiasts are always, claiming credit and going, that's my guy. And I'm like, okay, but if we clearly all have favorites, right? We clearly have horses that we're backing. And I just find it fascinating that we don't continue to track them over the first, 2, 3, I'd say first 4 years, because if you look at like just macro trends in development, it's really the 5-year window is where most of development happens. And you get some interesting numbers in there with delayed development, some other nerdy stuff about like, late growth spurts and, competitive, developmental environments and all these other things you can get into. But like, players get better. And like if you're going to be super jacked and follow a crop of guys, it's like, well, the story isn't over yet. They've just been delivered to the next stage, and the real stage is making it. It's getting a second contract, it's sticking in the league. And it's like, so it's always been, that's why I ended up becoming the director of NBA scouting. John will say it's because I made a shitty evaluation of Jerry McNamara, the point guard on the Carmelo teams. You will quote to this day, I'm like, you said he was unstoppable in transition. I'm like, to be fair, he was pretty good, and we had no synergy back then, so he seemed pretty unstoppable to me. But I digress. I always loved watching. And for my projections, especially when I started working professionally with teams, I found it to be much more helpful for me to be intricately familiar with the state of the team, which is like understanding their roster, understanding their kind of organizational direction, as I coined it, right? So like, what phase are they in development, right? Like, because that starts to reveal what kind of opportunities, right? Are you looking to heavily invest in a guy, right? Are you looking to bring in more young talent? Do you have some kind of cohesive core that you're like, what is the type of environment that a player is going to come in? Have significant impact on those outcomes, because I could scout a player to the cows come home and all of the variables change as soon as they get into the new team, right? And I used to use the analogies like, well, you might have loved this guy, but if he gets buried behind, $100 million worth of contracts, his chances of like getting meaningful opportunity, irrespective of his, latent ability, is pretty substantial. So it's like, I knew that these factors were influencing, kind of those projections. And so I just started, as I continued to go, I spent a lot, let's say less time, but I did rely on the kind of, I was lucky. I had Mike Schmitz and Jonathan Givony and a bunch of other very talented, shout out from Matt Kamalski, hanging out somewhere in Ohio right now. But like, we had that covered. And so my job was I had a minimum of like 25 games that I would watch of every client, which, let me tell you, when you have 17 in a given year, is way more basketball than you think it is. Like, I think people overestimate how much they watch a particular team, which is another reason Crowdscout, tracks stuff, just to see like, okay, what am I actually covering? Because I know people hand check this stuff, but it was always a process to make sure that I was getting a decent, valid, random sample. So I had a solid sense of like how I was consulting with the team. And that's the finding a role stuff to a T. Is like, I just realized it's like, there's so much more that you need to learn about how a guy succeeds once he gets drafted, that it's like, we need to chronicle that more, so we have a more acute sense of like what you might expect when a guy goes to a particular team, by having a not just a general sense of what they are, but kind of a categorical almost, sense of what this team is, right? And what the risk factors are that prospect inherits when he goes right to that development context, which is a great word that I have yet to see like a significant article on. What is development context? What are the factors? Another thing I'd love to write if I ever had time to to do it. I've got plenty of documentation about the subject, but I have not seen anybody write the development context like seminal, right? Like article. So there's a lot in there, and I think that's what it's about, is how do guys succeed that aren't just like knock you over the head superstars where everything is going to be like basically designed to try to help them succeed. Most guys have to get dropped into a situation and figure out how to make the best of it.
No doubt. And, speaking of Draft Express, what would you say, a combination, two questions, I guess. What was it like working with Jonathan Givony, now with ESPN, Mike Schmitz, now with the Portland Trail Blazers front office? And also, what was your scouting philosophy like? Like, when you're looking at prospects, watching all this film that, for clients or for a scouting report, what are you looking for that will help you kind of stand out and say, this guy's an NBA player, or like he clearly has these three definable traits that will translate to the NBA level, and that's enough to give him a chance in the draft?
Yeah, so I would say the first thing I do, I give credit for John for instilling in me a pretty acute appreciation for intel and understanding, the value of what you actually want to do when you're on the road, which is not watching the basketball. It is having access and paying attention to the stuff that you're only going to know when like you're in the satellite realm of the people and their families and the whatever. So like understanding how to be in the field, big thing from John. And then for Mike, which is related to this, is multiple environments, which is a huge thing. Being at like, I've never been more accurate than any of the guys that I watched since they were like 16, and happened to be like, not every guy can go to like USA basketball or whatever, but being able to see a guy in multiple team contexts that are constructed differently. It's one of the biggest things that made me much higher on Jason Tatum than the consensus was in the draft, is I had just seen him like 30 times. And a lot of the evaluation that I had heard coming into his draft was like very purely based on what they saw at Duke. And I'm like, well, I've seen him do like complete ensemble, like role player shit. So I'm like, all the Carmelo stuff, I'm like, yeah, okay. Like I saw that, but I also saw him play as a, like, a 10-man rotation guy that just kind of like ran around and did things. So it was like easier for me to have that perspective. And that started to clue me in on things like the Kentucky thing where everyone was better than they looked. And I'm like, well, yeah, you have to go downstream and look at what guys did when they weren't in some kind of like, like very narrowly defined things. Like, did they have skills beyond that? And so those are two things I got from them. And the thing that I brought to the table, which I'll give credit to my father, is he was a clinical psychologist, and I really started focusing in on the people element of it when I started scouting, which is like, all of us have a tendency to project ourselves into the decisions and actions of others. He's a relationship therapist, so this is like the fundamental flaw in what's called errors of attribution, right? As you look at in his case, someone's spouse or something, and you're like, oh, I can't believe they did that. They must be such a jerk, because if that was me, I would have only done this if I was like an asshole or whatever, right? And it's like what you realize very quickly is we tend to project ourselves into the behaviors that we see in other people in the absence of other information. So what I started getting into with combination of watching guys play on court in different environments, getting the intel to start understanding a little bit more about the worlds that they lived in, and then starting to get more into the personality elements, the like formalized assessments and stuff is what I did, but trying to match all of that information together to make a more complete picture, and then subsequently taking it to the environment. And that's just Psych 101. It's person situation, right? It's like, who is this person and how might this situation positively or negatively impact? And for me, that's context. It's a combination of skills. It's a combination of the actual like journey that the team is on and what their priorities are. And then it's the mix of people, which I think anybody that has a job and has worked with multiple people can understand that, like, you're not the same, right, in every context that you're in, just as a person, because the people around you influence, how you feel and how you respond to things. So, yeah, I think that's the heart of like kind of what I took away from that, and what I think I added to the equation. And I got to be a part of some really cool development stories. I think it's safe enough to say now, without going into too much detail, my last like big one, I had a pretty significant role in terms of being an outside consultant in the Trae Young, Luka Doncic, draft, with that situation specifically, weeks of research. That was an interesting one. Like I said, I won't go into too much detail about it overall, but like going in and looking at a situation like that, right? For instance, like, it's very easy to say that Atlanta made like the wrong choice, but from my perspective, the thing that we've seen a little bit of pouty Luka too, right? Like, we always knew Trae was a little bit of like lack sense of humor is kind of a Trae like quality, but like Luka is a little bit temperamental. And I think just to use that as an example to bring it all up, it was ridiculous that anyone thought that Luka was not, going to be an amazing player. And I learned a lot about, also from John, that like stats don't transfer. You have to understand the international leagues, and you have to understand style of play and all this other stuff. But in that situation, I think the biggest thing was what was the organizational direction. And for Atlanta, they wanted to do the, like, let's say the tanking thing, but the like more of a process-based approach. And Dallas was much more keen on going all in and building a competitive team right away. And that was basically my critical factor. I believe that Trae had that natural chip on shoulder, like always fighting upstream, everybody like doubting kind of quality that would allow him to not only like thrive in an environment that was basically going to be scorched earth and like building slowly up from the top, but also to be able to take the litany of comparisons that would always be made between him and Luka because of the trade. I was like, he was the person probably most ideally suited to deal with that, because that's kind of his thing. And for Luka, I was like, Luka is going to be much better off if he has a team around him that doesn't stress him out, right? So going for it earlier and trying to build from day one was a better environmental context. And that was my recommendation, essentially, was I said, if you want to build a team now, you take Luka. If you want to go and like tank or whatever the hell you want to call it, if you want to build slowly and organically for 5 years, he's probably not going to love that and may ask for a trade. So like, that's kind of like a good case point example of like, I'd say pre-draft to like selection philosophy. And then after that, we've talked a lot. This is the stuff that I love the most on the playback threads. We've talked about another article I would love to write that I don't have time, but kind of the 3 stages of development. And I think this gets lost a lot, right? Like this is definitely an Eric fundamental philosophy, is like, it's the 3 phases are just your raw talent development, which is just like dude gets better at shooting, right? Or dude gets better at ball handling or whatever, physical maturation, all these things that are just like the individual gets better at the stuff. Then there's the applied element, which is like, that's where you hear like the game starting to slow down or whatever. But even beyond that, it's just like you get enough experience to know when to sequence things, right? It's like knowing what tools to take out of the bag instead of just like having a bunch of shit that you can randomly do. It's like knowing when to do what, understanding down and distance, situations, starting to play the game from a mental standpoint is the second phase of development. And I think the third, it doesn't have to happen in this order, but these are the things I compartmentalize to, is like the contextual development, which is like, cool, do the other 4 players on the court help accentuate your strengths and mitigate your weaknesses? Because your productivity, and even beyond that, your decisions, you see guys make terrible decisions sometimes. You're like, this guy has terrible applied skill. A lot of times those are stressors, right? Based out of the context where you're like, okay, guy is now sped up, right? It's like a quarterback getting sacked a bunch of times and making bad reads. It's like, can he not read the court, or is he being negatively influenced in his thought process because he thinks he's going to get killed? It's like, you got a guy that's a predominant drive guy and it's not really a shooter, and then you have no space. I'm just using the most basic example ever. It's like, you might see a guy force a lot more drives. You're like, this guy has no selection. It's like, well, you're asking a person to basically be in a situation that is non-conducive to his best stuff. Like, you're going to get bad possessions that look like bad process, and maybe are, but the human element is also like, you can't drop people into stressful situations and not expect them to have like worse decision making, right? If the situation is naturally designed to create agitation. So those are my kind of 3 development areas, and that's kind of what I look for when I look at players. And you end up finding a lot of interesting guys that are on non-traditional paths. I will say, you named your guys. The one guy that I've had from the beginning of the season who I felt very strongly was due for a big jump was Peyton Pritchard. And shout out to Mike Schmitz, who like is one of Mike and John. We watched that guy play at the Hoop Summit forever on the, since he was like a freshman in high school or whatever he was. And that was just like the local talent competing. And the last year we saw him, he was on the USA select team. So like, had a lot of exposure to that scrappy little guy. So like, I've seen him up close. Like, I've probably watched him 50 times, right? Like, it's just so much, but interesting arc, right? He was a 4-year player, right? Most of the time those guys get discounted. Not huge, doesn't have like your traditional like physical tools or whatever athletic attributes, although his deceleration's probably as good as anybody's, and his ball handling is probably upper 1%, but nothing remarkable about him. And he's old and like small, right? And that's an easy one. And then gets decent run and has a solid rookie campaign, and then his minutes go into retrograde the next 2 years, and that's kind of all she wrote, right? It's the 21st pick or whatever, and it's a senior, and nobody gives a shit. But when you like kind of see some stuff, and you're like, wait, this guy's got great shooting ability. He can do move shooting. He has good size for his frame. Like, you kind of start throwing out that other stuff, and you're like, well, what's happening here in this development? And you're like, okay, team was in a championship run, very hard, whatever, championship build run, had heavy guard talent, continue to have options to, to collect more talent. And there's just wasn't opportunity. And then all of a sudden it culminates in him requesting a trade to get, nobody cares. But then like Brad Stevens is like, no, it's your turn now to be the first guard off the bench. And then he ends up having a very productive 4th year last year. And then they increased his role opportunity. And now you got like a 6-man guy and a guy that's starting to trend to much more sustainable stuff than just 3-point shooting. You've been seeing that in between game, his drive game, starting to see a lot of these layers. Those things were hidden in the tape, if you go watch, because he had strength, because he could decelerate, because he wasn't afraid of contact, right? Like, and so that's kind of, in a nutshell, another guy that represents that kind of 3 phases of development is like, yeah, it's year 5, right? That's what I said, the first 5 years. But sometimes it's not just like dude getting better. It's like there's a context there and a level of experience. And then there's an opportunity that comes that was not necessarily available and had nothing to do with maybe his ability. It was just the context did not afford that ability. So yeah, he got better, but he also got to a time where they were ready for him to, to push beyond whatever the spot shooter backup minute role was, right? Like the emergency 4th guy thing, like, changed. That wasn't just him. That was also the team. So I think that's the stuff that fascinates me, is watching these guys and being like, okay, well, how do you get your opportunities? And what do they say in life? Timing is everything, right? Like, timing has a lot to do with success on a basketball court too.
No doubt. I think there's a ton of profound insight there that you just shared. I mean, especially for anyone trying to like develop their skills as a scout. Ton of stuff to hit on. Like for me personally, I probably was also made the mistake of maybe overrating the college scene and setting, where you kind of, there's this notion that someone has to prove themselves in college, and that's the most valuable experience, the most valuable opportunity to prove themselves as an NBA prospect, when really it's just one sample size. It's one season of sample. It's 30 games roughly, and there is kind of a wide gap in experience even at that level, where they're going up. A lot of times these freshman phenoms are going up against 3rd and 4th year juniors and seniors that have a little more physically developed, a little more experience. And really, if you expand that pipeline and kind of look at the bigger picture, they might have a lot of them, like you said, with freshmen, with Peyton Pritchard, they might have 4 years of experience at the high school level playing their own age group, and kind of like being able to compare them against each other at that level each step of the way, where you see a much bigger path of, like you said, different contexts, different situations, different roles, different teams, and you're able to kind of see how they develop and handle each opportunity differently. And just a ton to hit on. I mean, the example with Peyton Pritchard in Boston, like exactly that a lot of prospects might take 3, 4, 5 years to actually show what they can really do in the NBA. And it might be for a variety of reasons. Like you mentioned, it might be just as simple as opportunity and timing, and the situation there where maybe Peyton's been ready to do that for a few years, and he just didn't get his crack in the rotation to prove himself. And then finally gets that opportunity, he stays ready, which is also important, and doesn't blow it when he's put out there. He doesn't. It's not like he's just lackadaisical effort, or just not giving his all because, or pouting or something like that, that some prospects might do, where they don't get the burn right away. He was ready. He stayed ready. He got the opportunity, and then slowly we'll see his role expanded, like you mentioned, up to now of a, like, the 6th man on a championship contender, and trusted and given a little more leeway to make mistakes and kind of like show what he can do. So there's that element. And then I thought, the tips right off the bat that you mentioned with Draft Express were, great insight into kind of what goes on for the scouting process, being able to evaluate different contexts for a player instead of kind of pigeonholing him or her to the one time you saw them on one certain team, and seeing how maybe he can do things as a primary initiator when he's got the ball more, or maybe does he accept his role? Is he scalable in a smaller role if he's loaded with talent around him, and how that looks? I mean, just off the top of my head, we've seen like Liam McNeeley on Montverde, flanked by all these top prospects that there might be 5, 6 first round draft picks on that Montverde team, all in the same draft. I mean, that's insane talent wise, and then just completely flanked with defense. And he was often player of the game, leading scorer of the game, partially because of his own skills and partially because of all the kind of like defense kind of flanked around him and talent around him. Whereas now
Right.
he might be getting it might be a little more challenging for him at UConn this season, where he's given more opportunity. He isn't flanked with Cooper Flagg, Asa Newell, and Derek Queen behind him covering up everything. Like all these basically lottery picks, or at least first round picks, flanking him, and then you got Rob Wright and Curtis Givens in the backcourt at Baylor and LSU now too. So that's just one example of kind of situation can change fast, and it's important to kind of weigh both of them and evaluate both of them. And one might not be more important than the other. It really depends on what you're looking for as a front office or scouting the draft. And you can kind of see, okay, maybe he is projected well for a 6-man role as a shooter who can attack closeouts, and maybe that's what we expect him to do, and he meets expectations compared to, if we draft him to be our primary initiator, scoring, half-court main guy, creator, maybe that's a little overtasked, and we'll be disappointed by those expectations. So it all comes down to like opportunity and actually meeting the expectations that can be realistic for the prospect.
But I think that was a great example, because I think we talked about this on the last stream. I think we all tend to, I don't say we all, but like I know I've done it and I see it a lot in the RAM. We tend to fetishize like prospect evaluation on a like a primary, like whatever. It's like a scale that like always starts as like, is this guy the franchise, right? I think we were talking about this in the context of Cooper Flagg, but I think McNeely's even more interesting. I think we lost sight. It's not just the role players, but there's like, and role player is a shitty word, because like you can be an all-star. Like role player has a wide swath, like
Derek White, literally, like he's gonna make an all defensive team USA standout guy, and he's considered a role player on a championship team,
and he has the same moniker as like a guy that's way worse, right? Like or whatever, right? Like I think we overuse role player, but what in the McNeely thing, it's like it's important to understand what a guy is capable of within a context, or at least try to forecast what they can be with surrounding talent around them, instead of just grading and taking points off for what they can't do as if they were slotted into the like franchise role. Because like, yeah, sure, if you need one of those guys and they're hard to get or whatever, great. But most of the time you're not in a position to get one of those guys. And also the guys that project the best, and I think this draft is starting to sound like this a lot, is like there are a lot of dudes that like cosplay as a number one option, but end up only being able to do those things at like a non-playoff team level, or a like they're only good at like the second or like third on a whatever. They're like they do those things, but they don't scale to this like very special group. Like it is very hard to find guys that can get to that level. It's harder than just finding guys that can kind of mimic it, right? And I think a lot of times we're like, oh, well, this guy has the upside. I'm like, well, does he, right? Like what's the percentage chance that the guy that does those things is actually going to reach the level where he can be a franchise guy, versus then looking at some of these like contextual like success guys, right? Guys that can do a lot of things in a ensemble, and maybe that still has like star level impact stuff, right? I think we were talking about Cooper Flagg, who's also like, I don't know if he's a franchise guy, but I don't know if any of these guys are. I don't know what the probability is. What I do know with a guy like that with a very high degree of certainty is he does a lot of shit that becomes even better when he's not the focal point, right? It's like the spacing plus the complementary talent. I'm like, this is a guy I can plug in and is going to be like, call him a floor raiser, whatever the hell you want to say. He's an impact player, right? And it's like, I don't just want to draft a dude that can self-create, right? And create advantages. I need to know if that guy is going to be able to do it at a level that impacts winning. And if I am not certain of that, I don't want to draft the mold of the thing that kind of looks like it and like hump the dream of it getting up to that upper 5%. I would rather take the dude that I know, if I put quality pieces around this. Derek White to like a perfect degree. Like the difference between Derek White season 2, not the season 1 mid-season trade guy that shot like 4 times a game because he was afraid to step on anybody's toes. The empowered, indoctrinated, part of the program guy. It's like we talked about, I want processing speed. That's what I want. I want a guy that can do a lot of things. I want a two-way guy that can think the game fast and basically does not hold on to the ball, because that's what gets stuff going. And yes, you want those dudes that can break dudes down and play slow or whatever, but they're extremely hard to find in terms of guys that do it well. Look at DeMar DeRozan's going to go to the Hall of Fame. He's never been a franchise guy, and he's better than I would bet that he's better than anybody coming out of this draft in terms of like creating offense. I don't think it's the hardest thing. He's going to score like 28,000 points in his career. I'm going to bet that he is better at scoring on probability than anybody that we're falling in love with right out of this draft. I'm just going to put money. I would be like, I'll bet that he scores more career points than any of these guys. It could be wrong. That's just completely random. But I'm like, this is just an example of like odds. DeMar DeRozan, 25,000 point career score. Not good enough to carry a franchise, right? So it's like, I think we have to be careful when we project these guys to not just be like, oh, it fits the mold of the thing that we need in this thing, and make sure that we're very acutely aware of the risk inherent and trying to project effectively instead of just buying into the cookie cutter and being like, oh, well, that's the thing that looks like the thing we need. It's like, you got to make sure that you're betting on the right horse, because for me, that's the Cooper Flagg thing for me. And fully disclosed, have not watched enough of these, draft guys, but I'm always constantly watching and reading and absorbing all this stuff. And it's the first thing that stands out is like one guy I have seen enough over the last like 3 years. I'm like, this dude will make your team much better, and every winning team will want a guy like that. And I'm like, I don't know that the other people in his satellite can impact, right? Like can reach that threshold, even if they look like the thing that can score a lot of points by themselves, right? So I think that's a big one for me.
For sure. I think the discussion around Cooper Flagg, especially where it's gotten to online, is the first thing that needs to be said is multiple things can be true. Like the way we describe Wembanyama as generational doesn't mean
if everyone's generational, that's overused for sure.
Yeah, it can be overused in that sense. And like, if anything, I would say his defense is, if you want to call it generational, that's fine by me. Like it's as impactful of a defender as you could really find, because he does all the little things well, but he has star upside as well. It kind of reminds me of like the way you've described like Sean Marion, throwing him out into a game. You don't have to run a play for him, and he's going to fill up the box score with at least 18 or 20 points, 10 boards, 2 blocks, 2 steals. I've been comparing him to like Kurlenko with a midi pull-up, where he's just going to be everywhere at all times, doing all the little stuff defensively. And he can also create his own shot pretty well in a couple different contexts. I kind of view his upside, like his absolute best ceiling, even then, still more of like, I mean, these are NBA superstars, but like more of like an Anthony Davis or a Kevin Garnett, like best case perfect scenario where everything goes right, where he's able to score efficiently in a bunch of different ways. He can hit deep jumpers, but he might still be even a play finisher in the best role, like playing, like both of them got to play with a Rajon Rondo point guard, where Rondo's the one setting up the half court offense, and obviously LeBron in LA as well. But both of those guys kind of were maybe at their best selves when they're playing with someone else who actually runs the offense, and they're prioritizing scoring, defense, and just keeping the ball moving for a better shot. So like, to me, that's his ultimate goal, but he is kind of in a tier of his own in this draft to me. With the DeRozan comp, the only name I can think of, and obviously we're just projecting draft picks, but Dylan Harper has shown he's a real scorer in this draft. Like, he is a bucket getter and a versatile scorer at that, can create his own shot, and I think we're going to be seeing him score in the league for a very long time as one of these like top 2 or 3 scoring options on a team wherever he ends up. But I'd say he's the likeliest in that sense. And then back to McNeeley, he kind of reminds me, maybe not in the shot variance, the tough shot making of a Malik Monk, but filling that kind of a role. Like if you slid him into the Herter role or the Monk role on the Kings right now, I think he'd be able to do some similar things as he develops his NBA body, where he's hitting catch and shoot threes, he's attacking closeouts, he's looking to throw down a hammer dunk off a handoff if the 3 point isn't there. And we got Eric on the move now. He's trying to find the driving lane to get through over here. So with that's kind of where I could see McNeeley's kind of potential playing out, where he's could be a 6-man in the right role, maybe even a spot starter, fringe starter type, where he can hit threes, attack closeouts, play off ball, run the handoffs, and even show a little explosiveness attacking the rim like that when the closeouts are there to attack. So a lot of talent in this draft. I'd say betting on Flagg's upside is the bet to make. And, maybe I'm underselling his creation because, like, to me, I've seen him attack, like, pump fake, attack a closeout, draw 2, and kick out for 3. He's ran a lot more pick and rolls at Duke than he has in high school, and he's shown a couple skip passes. He's shown the ability to read and process more. So maybe that development will still show itself out over Duke, and he will be more of a primary creator. It's always possible. I'm basing a lot of what I've said on seeing him up close in person at Montverde and watching his tape kind of over the last few years in high school as well. And then obviously a couple times here at Duke as well. So, he's easily like the star of this draft, and any team that gets him is getting a winning player that, like, it is the rare case of a potential star who does all the role player things well as an active, energetic defender whose hands are everywhere, deflections are nonstop, his instincts are off the charts, especially as a defender, rebounder, play finisher, tough shot maker in the post, stretch it out to 3, midi pull-ups. I mean, like, he's going to score and defend at the NBA level very consistently, I think. So those are bankable traits for his rising stardom. And then also what I was thinking of earlier was the Luka and Trae trade and the draft there. I mean, that was one of the first drafts that I really deep dove into. I was huge on Jaren Jackson as the second best player and the best big man of that draft, when there were a lot of talks about DeAndre Ayton going 1, Mo Bamba's potential, Marvin Bagley and Wendell Carter were in those talks. And Jaren just stood out to me because he had the block numbers and the 3 numbers like Bamba that were, like, pretty much off the charts with high percentages, but he also showed that fundamental footwork in the post and a kind of a unique jump shot where it's like a quick trigger for a big man from 3. And
I couldn't get over the arms. Like, every time I looked at it, I was like, I don't buy it.
It looked weird.
Shout out to Schmitz again. Schmitz was way ahead on, like, that was his guy. He was like, no, Jaren Jackson Jr. is awesome. I'm like, I don't see it, man. I was way off on. I could not get over the shot. I was just like, no, it's low. It's strange. I learned a lot in that. I was like, okay, like, I can't be snap judging because some kind of aesthetic is making me crazy.
It was weird looking in that sense. Like, it was almost like the shot of a guard quick trigger, but he was just letting it fly almost from his hip and up instead of the extended long set shots that you often see a big man that's pick and popping. But that kind of touch around the rim and the post, the fundamental footwork, the range out to the 3-point line. That was actually my first big article for Swish Theory, was Jaren Jackson's development path from some of those traits he showed early on to the season where Ja Morant was out, and he stepped up as, like, a primary scoring option and showed that he might not be a half-court creator, but similar to Anthony Davis, he can get his and be a defensive anchor. And it's just super rare to find someone that can anchor your defense almost on his own, protect the rim, and score and shoot from 3 like a number 1 option. So, that's all these different traits that made him special as well. And yeah, I mean, it's interesting the way you break down the Luka Trae trade with Travis Schlenk at the time was the Hawks GM, and he was coming from the Warriors, and there was kind of front office, and there was some talks in that he wanted, like you kind of hit on, he wanted to slowly build out that kind of process around Trae Young the way that they may have built around Steph back then, where you're gonna surround him with smart basketball players, high feel, a lot of length, defensive versatility, and kind of slowly build out that talent pipeline around Trae. And it's interesting to think that way because, you know, I think Luka, for most of us, like, was the clear guy in that draft. Like, he just was bonkers overseas. Like, there was no, like, he was playing since like 14 or 15, dominating the Euro leagues, winning the
Yeah.
MVPs. And like you said, he got numbers over there. And maybe, you know, you don't want to say he's going to get the same numbers there, but he's showing the traits of a lead scorer, lead half court creator, the kind of primary initiator. And then Trae Young kind of had an up and down college where the first like half of the season in Oklahoma, I was just blown away by Trae because he was a one-man offense. He was scoring
Yeah.
at will, shooting threes, pick and rolls, and then he didn't really have enough hitting on some of the development phases that you talked about. Maybe the context and situation around him made it tough for him to thrive because he just got doubled every play at about halfway through, and his teammates just couldn't knock down the open shots, couldn't create the offense without him very often, and that led to kind of the Oklahoma team sinking a little bit at that point once their offense kind of got figured out. But him as a prospect, like, just clearly had all these skills as a primary initiator. And, you know,
he had a fucking 30-20 game like last week.
Yeah,
I mean, he's exceptionally gifted offensively.
Like, nowadays he's putting up like prime Harden numbers almost. Like, to me, he's one of the few players you can just roll the ball out there, run 30, 40 pick and rolls a game, and get a good shot every time down the floor, where he's good at the bad shots that defenses want you to take because you got to make a choice as a defense. You got to give up something. Most of them will give up floaters and mid-range pull-ups because they're the toughest, least efficient shots on the floor. But when you got Trae Young running pick and rolls, who's got a deadly floater, got a perfect touch on the lob pass where he can do either one, roll into the rim with the roll man, and he can pull up from three, so you can't go under the screen. And he's a natural point guard, like you said, 20 assists. I mean, he's looking for shooters. He's looking to make the right play with the ball. So, you know, he's in terms of individual half court offense creation, like scoring, creator, decision making, that I call it, that feel, he's up there with anyone as a half court creator. And from there, it's, can you cover up his defense even though it's gotten better? And can you kind of fill out the rest of the shooting and the offense around him? So there's, you know, a lot to like for him as an NBA player and NBA star. It's like kind of ludicrous to me that he's not viewed as a perennial all-star with those numbers and what he's able to do as an offensive engine compared to, you know, so many other teams that are trying to find someone like him. But, you know, he just gets kind of ragged by media for a couple different reasons. And you mentioned some of them already, but, you know, it's a shame. And maybe their team will bounce back a little more. Maybe if they make the playoffs or are in that playoff hunt, they're 13-12 right now, but, you know, a little more shooting and kind of development for the other guys. And maybe it's not this year, but maybe they'll kind of swing back up in the right direction after all the trades they've made.
Yeah, they're an interesting team to me just because they feel like they should be better. They've like stagnated and they have pieces and whatever. We won't go into a whole side thing there, but they're an interesting team in terms of construct. And obviously there's things you got to figure out how to build around anybody, but Trae's another good example. When we go back to this draft again, it's like, look how good he is offensively. And it's easy to just kind of go, oh yeah, but defense or whatever. But it's like, look at how good he is offensively and then see how little that is impacting. Like, it's very hard to carry a team and be like, whatever, even if that's like a big piece, like it is hard to reach that level of offense. So projecting any of the on ball guys, right? Even Harper or whatever, be like, hey, yeah, like, okay, like, are you going to be like, how productive are you going to be and how much of an impact is that going to make? Like, it's still team dependent, but I'm a big believer in the idea that you can build ensemble teams. If you don't, like, it's simpler to fit the mold where you're like, get best number one guy possible that can do most shit most frequently. It's like, yeah, obviously, but if that guy's not there, trying to like force that team build versus just releasing your mind from that and being like, can we get 5 guys that would be worth $30 million when they're free agents, and be like, cool, if we can't get one dude to be better than your one dude or 2 guys to be better than your 2 guys, can we put together 5 guys that do the things that make it extremely hard to defend and also like score? And that's why I'm like, give me two-way guys that have good processing speed. And yes, you need some guys to put the ball in the basket. You can't have a team of 5 dudes that need to be set up on all their shots. But I also don't need God tier self-creation if I can like diffuse self-creation and know that 5 people also make defenses less potent on concentrating, rolling help over to a particular person. If everyone can do everything, then you just need the intelligence to move the ball to where they ain't, right? Basically. And it's a lot easier to self-create when a guy is recovering to the weak side on a ball swing or a skip pass or whatever, right? So like, I am a big believer. I think that Jaren Jackson was a good example of it too. It's like, I didn't believe, like I got caught up in his shot thing. And then also when I watched him at Michigan, because I kept my, like, I never discount anything Schmitz has ever told me about a prospect, or John either, but I'm like, okay. And I couldn't get over the fact that he couldn't rebound either. I'm like, sure, he blocks shots, but I'm like, he can't rebound. Like, I don't know if he can necessarily shoot. I did not see any kind of creation. So I fell for the same kind of like, I don't know what he is. And then to go back to it, it's like, cool. Like, what is Memphis? Ja fits the like whatever. And I don't like him that much because I'm like, you're super inefficient and you take a bunch of shots you shouldn't take. And I have no idea how you age past 30, right? Like, I'm like, and he's like the guy. He's like super talented, but I'm like, I have more questions on him. The other dudes like Desmond Bane and Jaren Jackson, the only thing that was any good out of last season is I got to see them scale up a little bit and push their skill sets, but they had already established themselves as like high impact players in an ensemble that yes, Ja was stirring the drink or whatever. But again, I was like, well, Ja could even get better and they'd be even better because he could make better decisions, and he's young and that's fine. But like Jaren Jackson had done a total 180. Yes, he made more shots than I thought he would, but like he was just more productive within a context, not necessarily a guy that you could be like, you're our primary option, but you can score a lot of points in this league if your system creates matchup advantages that are advantageous for a more narrow skill set. And that's why I believe in the power of 5 over emphasizing the one dude, because if you do it smartly, you could, like, we talk about the NBA as a matchup thing or whatever, but it's like, I think it's a lip service thing a lot of times again too, where it's like, well, what do you have represented on the court and how like amorphous is it? Right. I think last stream, we were talking about this a little bit. It's like, I'm a big believer in watching multiple sports, and I was a scholarship like football guy. Right. I did not like football, like pick up basketball, but I'm only 6'3", right? I'm wider than I am tall. Got alligator arms. So like, football made a lot of sense. Right. But I love watching other sports. And one of the things that I've always paid attention to with football is it's almost like positionless football started first. It's not quite positionless, but we went from like base sets. Like you ran a 4-3, you ran a 3-4, you had like a third down nickel package. Now people put in weird shaped dudes like in any situation because it's all matching skills, right? It's like, oh, I'm going to have hybrid linebackers because I need speed and power so I can hedge against the run, but I can also keep up the foot speed to go with these like weird size receivers that are kind of tight ends or whatever, right? Like there's all this like, everyone used to fit in a size box, right? Every linebacker was between like 250 and 265, right? Like there was all this like moldings, and now you have all this weird size and agility combos that basically just give strange matchups. And you've seen the percentages of plays. I continue to think, and this is why it was interesting with Steve Kerr doing it. This, like, I don't think you can run a 12-man, rotation, because I think there's inherent issues with that. But the idea that you would start to match personnel, like you'd be more free flowing with your rotations to kind of like try different things and be like, I'm going to put this combo in now, right? Instead of spamming 1 to 3 main lineups, it's more like, oh, when we face this thing, we're going to take it, like basically having packages for different guys, right? And being like, yeah, it's not about running our shit. It's about running this shit when we see a tactical advantage, and having that multiplicity, right? Like being able to go to something. And I think that is only possible if you start getting out of the mold of like, these are our dudes and this is the hierarchy of like how this works, versus being like, cool, can we put the most dynamic 5-man combos? And like, because whatever, what's the negligible difference between dude number 4 on team A, B, and C, right? If they do the same shit and they're just parked in the corner, or they're like hiding in the dunker spot or whatever, like if you do the exact same thing tactically, then it's just like, who's the better guy? But if you start to like really fuck with the tactics based on the personnel and like focus on taking advantage of a weak point, I think you can really expand a lot of what you can do if you know your personnel and they complement each other in a way that goes back to that. You can have a more narrowed skill set, but if you have something that is really good, being in a situation that can capitalize on that one thing that you might have an advantage in, even if it doesn't scale across 200 possessions in a game, if you can just dominate 25 possessions, I still feel like it's the natural progression of basketball as we have more analytics and we have more limits. Like, you're never going to make more top 10 players, right? No matter how many lists we make, like it just basically that list doesn't grow or change or is effectively useful that much at all, right? For anything, if we're going to try to build every team with the idea that you got to get a top 10 player, it's like, okay, or we can try to switch it up and try to figure out how to take advantages of specific matchups and throw different looks at people that they're not ready for, and all of a sudden your fourth guy is like featured for a second because right, like they're not expecting that. It's almost the reverse of what happened in the Boston game the other night, where Memphis decided to just like leave Drew Holiday open, and I think a little bit of that was like shock, where it's like mentally like stay ready, right? It's like, wait, I'm going to take 25 shots tonight. I'm like, oh, I'm not ready for that. But like conversely, if you kind of do that stuff right on either side, you can take advantage of like switching it up, right? And being like, well, they weren't expecting that. They're just going to run pick and roll all day. It's like, nope, we're just going to do post-ups, right, on your like undersized center, right? Like we're just going to do that for the entire first quarter until you lose your mind and don't know what to do because that wasn't in the game plan. So I think that's some of the interesting stuff when you look at team builds. And I think more of that stuff is happening as like teams are getting deeper rotations. The rosters are looking more to have matchup based stuff. I think you're just going to see more experimentation with like switching up the go-to offense or whatever, and just like really looking at capitalizing off of a specific advantage that you see based on not the name on the back of the jersey, but like the skill and how you can play off of that and basically confound a defense, because that's not how it works, right? Like you should be able to look at the box score and know who's going to get the shots.
Yeah, and to hit on something you said earlier was, I think the hardest part, other than just evaluating if a player projects to be an NBA level player, is that line in the draft that happens every draft where the star hunting stops and the good basketball player hunting begins, where and like trying to force every top lottery pick into the idea of, can he be a star, can he be a top 3 primary option or a potential all-star one day, into, can he just hoop, can he be a good basketball player who can dribble, pass, and shoot, defend his own position, ideally defend a few different positions, can he bring positive impact as a winning player, good decision-making feel for the team first on both ends of the floor. And going back to the same idea with football, where, you just have to find talent at every position that can handle everything, or else you will be exploited for your weaknesses. And the same kind of thing goes with, playing different matchups. Like you're seeing more hybrid mobility and the ability to stop the run or run back and stop the pass all in the same player.
Yep.
And that's kind of just where sports has gotten to, instead of just being all strong or all speed or all one very isolated skill or the other. We've seen it with even shooters in the NBA, where used to be able to get away with just being a standstill shooter. And
Yeah.
now you probably have to be a little bit more of a movement shooter. You probably have to be able to pump fake the shot and dribble and pass to kind of keep the ball moving, or else you'll just kind of bring limits to the game that a lot of other guys don't have anymore. And it's going to be hard to get minutes on a winning team that way. So, I think the important thing in the draft, like you mentioned, is, after the clear stars are taken, at what point do you decide, are we going to try to force this guy to be a star based on hope and possibilities that haven't really been shown? Or are we going to target someone who we know is a good basketball player who makes winning plays on both ends of the floor and can kind of plug and play into any team and build winning habits that way? And there's something to be said that sometimes the sum of the parts ends up being potential that was unseen. And I think Franz Wagner is a clear example of that, where he was billed as kind of like a high floor but low ceiling player because he was already so good at so many things, but he wasn't a clear highlight ESPN top 10 type of highlight player throwing poster dunks, hitting fadeaway threes. But he was a 6'10" offensive option who or two-way option, really, 6'10" player who could score a little bit, dribble, pass, and shoot. He could defend in the front court well, and now he's developed into an all-star level player. Obviously, he just got hurt not too long ago, so he might not make the team now. But he's been putting up 28 points a game and like basically 28, 8 and 8, or whatever his averages have been. Maybe it's like 6 and 6, but he's been doing a little bit of everything. And with his size, creating those mismatches, that's rounded out into a sum of its parts player where he's just tough to stop, where he's almost become a guy you can hand the ball to and just run the offense through. He has this season, at least. We'll see if it keeps going, especially when Paolo comes back too. But he's been able to just run pick and rolls, get to the rim himself, drive, draw fouls, finally has his pull-up three-point shot back to where it needs to be to really threaten the defenses at every level. And it's just a tough player to stop on because he's able to create good looks for himself and the team and make good decisions while doing it. And when you got a 6'10" creator as a half-court offensive engine like that, that's just a mismatch waiting to happen. And like you hit on as well, like creating mismatches and advantages is still the name of the game. So like you can rely on one star to just go get a bucket every single time down the floor, which is pretty inconsistent and pretty hard to do sustainably on a winning team against other loaded up teams that are all focused on trying to stop him, compared to building a system where all five guys threaten something. And obviously the Celtics have built incredible lineup versatility, matchup versatility, where they've surrounded two all-star level players with Tatum and Brown, now with other former stars or potential stars, however you want to describe them, with Drew Holiday and Kristaps and Derek White on the rise, where they can pretty much handle any matchup. They can switch everything. They have high impact defenders everywhere. And to me, what separates them even more is they have high scoring efficiency in many different play types, where their third or option might be Kristaps in the post, where he was an all-star for the Wizards as the only option over there doing it, and now he's your third option, one of the most efficient post-up mismatch hunters in the league, and he's able to get a mismatch almost any time because the defenses are caught up trying to stop the Jalen's from scoring. So that's a go-to whenever he has the size advantage, and obviously can protect the rim and pick and pop from three. And it's a lot easier to be a high-impact defender when you're not the only one out there doing it, when you're not being relied on as the full defensive anchor a la Dwight Howard in 2009, where you have to basically stop everything at every time all on your own, and you're actually able to conserve some energy, make plays when the timing is right, and still get yours offensively and be more of a part of that team, that system, able to make good decisions on both ends.
Going back to Franz again, right? Like, franchise got whatever it's like almost like generational. Franchise guys do not grow on trees. That like most all-stars, even most of the all NBA guys are not quote unquote franchise guys. They just happen to be like the best player on a team. That is different than raising the win-loss, like, ability of your team by like 30 games like LeBron used to do. And it's like there are very few like of those guys, Jokic, whatever. Like I would just put a very short list of dudes that I'm like, oh, this guy establishes a franchise, right? Most guys are just like very good and allow you to build easier, right, in some ways. But like knowing that that's a scale is huge. And to go back to Franz, it's like, to your point, like, and this kind of goes into Cooper and all that, and back to my philosophy of team building, I'm like, look, the chances of getting a franchise guy or a singular talent that is going to substantially change the whatever the 5-year forecast of your team with all the other stuff that you have to do to like actually be good, right, is very low. But if you draft guys instead of getting caught up on their whatever upside, so like awesome, like Franz, like whatever, Paolo went down and we saw this huge new burst or whatever from him offensively, and it's great. But like a 6'10" guy that knows how to play basketball. Again, it's the processing stuff. It is being multiple on defense. Like if I just kind of went to a go-to draft philosophy and I didn't overanalyze everything and I just took the guy that could guard the most positions and was the most intelligent, irrespective of whether or not the shooting like needed work or whatever. Most of the time, that kind of turns like the magic thing with length. You don't just draft length. That's dumb. That's how you get like Mo Bamba, and you miss the fact that he doesn't really give a shit about basketball because he's a super genius and like whatever. It is clearly not motivated by whatever opportunities that he's had. He's going to go do other stuff. But like, if you get the dudes that can play, right? And by play, I mean like the guys that just like know how to make decisions, like are advanced for their like reading of the game, and they can play multiple positions, which usually correlates to decent length and agility. But like, I don't care what package it comes in. So you get weird guys like Marcus Smart and, Josh Hart and all these guys that aren't like super huge, I guess. But like, you just look for that stuff. It's like, do these guys make winning plays? Whatever you want to say. Do they make quick, smart decisions for their age? And can they play both ways and cover multiple positions? If you just do that, you might still be missing the like star dude to bring it all together, but you will have a very good team and you will have no trouble moving any of those players to then go get the guy. So the false assumption that you can like draft the guy, right? I think I don't remember what the study was like, okay, most championships have been won by top 10 picks. Again, I think that also has a lot to do with like how you try to win and how you build the team, but also in that loss, and that is like a lot of those players were not on the team that drafted them too, right? So it's like, if I'm drafting knowing how uncertain it is and how unlikely it is, again, going back to the DeMar DeRozan, going back to the Trae Young, what is the likelihood you're going to get guys that productive? And has it made a shit of a difference for the teams that they're on? Like, yeah, it hasn't been like some like cheat code to win. Like you might just produce another productive but like not non-impactful, but you know what I'm saying. It doesn't just, oh, we figured it out, we solved it, like it's over, right? Like knowing that, I would rather just, if I'm playing the forecasting gambling game, I'm just getting guys that already know how to do shit and can do that shit on both sides of the court. And if I just accrue a bunch of those guys, I'm going to go from bad to pretty good very fast. And then it's this part where you're really looking at those details. Like maybe you draft that guy, but you're going to be in a much better position to acquire that guy if you have a roster of 7 guys that are all dudes that people want on their team. Like Derek, like I could build a team out of these guys, right? It's just like Derek White and Josh Hart and like all these, like you could just like lump them together. Do they have the best shooting? No. Do they, like you can pick the individual flaws to pieces, but if you put 5 dudes on the court like that, they're tough to beat. Like they're just, because they make better decisions over 100 offensive possessions and 100 defensive possessions than likely you will. And then you have to beat that with like amazing, right? And it's like, how much marginal advantage do you have on amazing? Like some teams, like a Jokic, right? Like that goes back to the franchise thing again. It's like, how many teams can offset 200 possessions of intelligent execution with just like skill, right? Any given night, someone can go off. But if we're looking at basketball with like 3-point attempt advantages and all this, I'm like, I just rather take the process efficiency advantage and be like, cool, I have 82 games. I have 200 possessions every game. I'm just going to get smarter guys and we'll lose 25% of our games because like talent goes off. But I'm like, I don't think most of the league has enough talent to beat all of my stuff. I'll leave with this. When the U.S. team lost in 2004 or 2006, and they got beat by like Puerto Rico, it blew my entire mind. Because I watched a bunch of guys that played below the rim just move the ball all around a bunch of all-stars that had no idea how to play together. I'm like, talent doesn't matter. Like, not as much as I thought. I was like, these guys don't know how to play together. And this other team that has no chance, like not a single one of these guys could play in the league, is just like out executing these guys, right? Like there's and there's passing the ball around and doing stuff and have these guys on a turnstile, right? And it's just like, oh, so if you build a team and the marginal talent difference is like, I just want better execution, right? Like I just want, and that's what every coach wants. But I'm like, why don't we start with not handicapping ourselves by trying to turn talent into effectiveness, right? And just like, who is the talent that is most effective already? And that's, I guess, how I kind of measure my guys. I'm like, because I just don't think there's that much spread, even at the top of a draft. I'm like, if you aren't generational, if you aren't like Wembanyama or whatever, you aren't like, if you're not easily projected as a knock you over the head, franchise altering guy, whatever difference in skill and shooting, or I don't care. I want the guy that's going to impact 200 possessions, like much more. Like if I'm, especially at the beginning of a draft without said franchise guy, I'm like, no, I'm at stage where process efficiency over 200 possessions has way more impact than like moonshotting for a dude that I think can score 25 points a game right off the bat. Because I've seen plenty of guys that can score 25 points a game, makes no difference in the wins and loss column. So like, that's kind of my thing. If I'm lower, I just want to get the guy that knows how to play. He's more advanced in understanding the game, and I'll work with the rest. And that's the Franz and whatever, like the dudes that know how to play just make everything easier. And they're also easier to play with, which like, then you're talking about that, rising tide lifts all boats things. Those guys become multipliers in how good everyone else is. So like, that's just kind of my overall philosophy is get those guys. They're always valuable. We live in a trade based universe in the NBA. You don't have to draft all your guys. Be smart, get the dudes that are clearly going to make the biggest impact on where you're at the moment. And that will create optionality because those guys will be in demand if they're effective. They will always be a place to have a conversation about trading dudes that know how to play, that are clearly going to impact winning on another team, which makes you have more options. So,
yeah, and to the point of that two-way floor balance, another stat I think every champion since Shaq and Kobe has had a top 12 rating on both sides of the ball, top 12 defense and top 12 offense. So it's not just one guy, it's the team, it's your 9-man rotation and filling it with guys that know how to contribute on both ends and bring positive impact on both ends. And a quick shout out to Carlos Arroyo. I think he was on those.
Maybe Carlos was on
the day.
Yeah.
I think he made it.
He was pretty good.
Magic legend, but yeah, exactly.
Also Utah Jazz, I think his OG team, but yeah, he was good. He could play.
I hear you. Well, it's been great talking hoops. Really enjoyed jumping into your scouting process and everything. We'll have to hit on the Kings another time. Some exciting, interesting things they're doing with their team building. I know you got to get out of here, but appreciate you hopping on the pod today, Eric.
No, it's fun. It's always fun to talk hoops. Now I got to do work.
Well, good luck with that. And
take care.
I'll see you soon on a playback stream. Everybody can check it out, the Swish Theory channel, and follow Eric Weiss _SA on Twitter.
Awesome. Take care, Ryan.
With
Learning Basketball is a Swish Theory podcast hosted from Beyond the Arcade. Hey, that's me. You can find my work on Twitter, YouTube, Substack, and check out the team's writing at theswishtheory.com.